President Macron, thank you for your time. We really appreciate it.
Thank you. I'm very happy to have the opportunity to speak with you.
We are honored to have you here to speak with us. Mr. President, take me inside your meeting at the White House today, those high-stakes talks. Are you now closer to reaching a peace deal between Russia and Ukraine?
Look, I do hope, and I really believe it was an important meeting at the White House this 18th of August, with President Zelensky, President Trump, and a series of European leaders here. All of us, we want peace. All of us, from day one. And this is very important. Second, all of us are very clear that we want to stop the killings as soon as possible. You can call it a ceasefire, you can call it a truce, an armistice, but we want to stop these killings. Number three, all of us, we are clear about the fact that we want a robust and long-standing peace, which means no peace without what we call security guarantees. Why? Because we want to preserve Ukraine from risk of new aggression after this peace, and we want to contain Russia as an aggressive power vis-à-vis the rest of Europe. Here are our objectives, and I think we did progress because we converge, all of us, first to work very actively on security guarantees. So from tomorrow we will work very actively, and you know, we launched in February this year this coalition of the willing. We have now 30 countries, and we co-chair with the UK this coalition, and this coalition will work very actively now with the United States of America, which is a great news, in order to provide, the day we have a peace agreement, these security guarantees together. And second, we decided as well that a bilateral meeting between President Zelensky and President Putin will be organized, and this is the clear outcome of the discussion at the end of our meeting between President Trump and President Putin. And this bilateral meeting will be followed by a trilateral meeting between President Zelensky, President Trump, President Putin. And I propose as well, as a follow-up, that we enlarge and have a multilateral meeting, because the Europeans, probably the Turks as well, and some others, have to be around the table, because we don't just speak about the security of Ukraine, but the security of the whole Europe. So on all these points, we had a clear convergence. And for me, it was very important today, after the meeting between President Trump and President Putin in Alaska, to have this clear convergence of Europe and Ukraine and the US on these key outcomes.
I want to delve into all of those issues. I do have to ask you, President Trump was overheard on a microphone talking to you, and he said, quote, "I think he wants to make a deal," meaning Putin. "I think he wants to make a deal for me. You understand that? As crazy as it sounds." What went through your head when he said that to you?
I think if, at the end of the day, if we have a deal which is compliant with this long-standing and robust peace, this is a great news. And your president, indeed, is very confident about the capacity he has to get this deal done, which is a good news for all of us, and can break this, I would say, this daily killings, which are the responsibility of the Russian aggressor. So I think it's a great news. My point, and this is why we've worked so hard during the past few months, and we need this convergence, is to be sure that this deal is not detrimental to Ukraine and Europe. And all of us, we want a deal, and we want a peace deal. But we want to make sure that this peace, and so this deal, will be something which will allow the Ukrainians to recover the country and live in peace, to be sure the day after this peace deal that they will have sufficient deterrence power not to be attacked again, and to be sure for the Europeans that they will live in peace and security. So this is the nature of the peace, which will be now the core of our work. But I think this is a great news, and indeed your president is very confident about his capacity to get this deal done with President Putin, and it's great.
Let's talk about the issues. You were very firm. You still think a ceasefire is necessary. President Trump, on his way to Alaska, said that he wanted there to be a ceasefire agreement. Otherwise, he said there would be very severe consequences. Do you think a ceasefire is still possible?
I do hope. Let's call it once again truce or ceasefire, but we have to stop the killings. First, for humanitarian reasons. Second, because if we want sincere, reasonable, comprehensive talks in order to build a peace, you cannot organize this discussion, in the middle of the bombs. Look, today we were with President Zelensky. President Trump called President Putin at the end of our meeting, and we meet again right after this call. In the meantime, the Russian army organized a series of strikes on civilians in Ukraine. So it's impossible for an Ukrainian president and Ukrainian officials to have talks about peace as their country is being destroyed and as their civilians are being killed.
Did you, all of the European leaders, press President Trump on that point today and insist that he continue to apply pressure to Putin for a ceasefire right now?
I will be very clear on that. President Trump was the first one to propose a ceasefire in February. In March, President Zelensky accepted the unconditional ceasefire in Doha. The one who always refused the ceasefire has been President Putin.
So should President Trump impose sanctions on President Putin now?
And President Trump was very clear on the fact that after Alaska, his perspective is not just to have a ceasefire, but a peace deal, which is much more comprehensive. So it could be a good news, but it's clear that a peace deal will not be written overnight. It will take time, probably a few days, few weeks. And during this period of time, we need a truce. This is why I call it a truce. And not a ceasefire, if we want to use a different word, but we have to stop the killings. So we all agree with your president that we have to increase the pressure to stop the killings and to launch a process to have a full-fledged peace agreement. So this is our objective.
Can he do that? Can you apply pressure to Putin without imposing
I'm very much
sanctions?
in favor of the fact that if at the end of the day there is no serious progress during the bilateral, or if there is a refusal of the trilateral meeting, and or if the Russians don't comply with this approach, yes, we have to increase the sanctions, secondary and primary sanctions, in order to increase the pressure on the Russians to do so. And sometimes I'm very shocked by, I have to say, the fact that a lot of people can present something as just a war between two sides. There is an aggressor, which is Russia. There is a country which decided to kill people, to steal children, and who refused this ceasefire and peace. So we cannot just create an equivalent situation between Ukraine and Russia.
Let me ask you about the discussion over security guarantees.
Yes.
What exactly did you agree to as it relates to security guarantees? Does that mean European troops, and does that mean U.S. troops?
Look, I think for me it's a very important progress of the past few days that your president expressed the clear commitment of the U.S. to be part of the security guarantees. It's brand new. And last February, when I took the responsibility to gather a series of European leaders with President Zelensky in Paris, and we followed up in London, and we created this coalition of the willing. And it was a reaction to the feeling we had that we could see a temptation to go to a rapid peace, but without any guarantee for Ukraine. And we know what it means. It was Georgia 2008, but it was as well Crimea 2014. And there is full certainty that if you make any peace deal without security guarantee, Russia will never respect its words, will never comply with its own commitments. So it's for us totally critical, and this is an essential part of any deal for Ukraine and for the Europeans. This is for our own security. So this is a very important progress of the past few days that the US now is willing to be part of this security guarantees. We worked with the Coalition of the Willing, which is co-chaired by UK and France, and we have a very clear view of the content of such a security guarantee. The first pillar is the Ukrainian army. The first security guarantee for Ukraine and Europe is to have an important Ukrainian army, which will resist to any new aggression and which will create a deterrence effect vis-à-vis, the attempt to aggress Ukraine again. So we worked on the format of this army, and in fact, what we want is no limitation in terms of number of soldiers, ammunition, equipment, and so on. And who is ready to help the Ukrainians on what? Training, equipments, Patriot system, SAMT, new generation system, aircraft, and so on, to have this solid Ukrainian army. The second pillar is to be sure that in the air, on sea, on land, we have a support from all the different key partners of the Coalition of the Willing to come and to support the Ukrainian forces, not to be a substitute. And the obsession and the first priority is not to have our boots on the ground, but to be sure that we have regular operations which are a sort of guarantee or strategic signal that it's not just a piece of paper that the day they are attacked, we will be here. Because this piece of paper, we had it in the past. It was called the Budapest Agreement, and it didn't work. So we want to create a clear strategic signal of our support to the Ukrainian army. And some of the key people of the key countries, part of the Coalition of the Willing, already committed to do it. UK, France, Turkey, for instance, which has a very important role in the sea, and a series of other countries. So now, from tomorrow, we will start to work with the US, all the members of the Coalition of the Willing, these 30 countries, from Canada to Japan, Australia, and a lot of Europeans, in order to clearly go to the detail and say who is ready to do what. And this first phase is very important and should be finalized before the trilateral meeting, because these security guarantees are the one to put Ukraine in a situation to negotiate.
And I'm getting a wrap. Let me just ask you,